Question 1. Comparative studies suggest that applicants for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, often face challenges in accurately self-assessing their eligibility due to past legal encounters. Considering the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, which of the following approaches best ensures a compliant and successful LTCF application when an applicant has a prior arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was later dismissed? Option A. Fully disclose the arrest and dismissal on the LTCF application, providing any available documentation of the dismissal, and be prepared to answer further questions from the sheriff's office. Option B. Omit any mention of the arrest on the LTCF application, assuming that a dismissed charge does not constitute a disqualifying offense. Option C. Contact the sheriff's office for informal advice on whether the dismissed arrest needs to be disclosed, without submitting any formal documentation. Option D. Rely on advice from a friend who also has a dismissed arrest and was granted an LTCF, and therefore do not disclose the arrest on the application. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose the arrest and dismissal on the LTCF application, providing any available documentation of the dismissal, and be prepared to answer further questions from the sheriff's office. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuances of Pennsylvania's firearm laws, specifically concerning the definition of prohibited persons and the process for obtaining a license to carry firearms, LTCF. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to a denial of the application, potential legal repercussions, and a failure to uphold public safety. Careful judgment is required to ensure all legal requirements are met and that the applicant demonstrates a clear understanding of their responsibilities as a firearm owner. The best professional approach involves a thorough and honest self-assessment of any past legal entanglements that might fall under the definition of a prohibited person under Pennsylvania law, coupled with proactive engagement with the licensing authority. This means accurately disclosing all relevant information on the LTCF application, even if the applicant believes it may not be disqualifying, and being prepared to provide supporting documentation. This approach aligns with Pennsylvania's statutory requirements for an LTCF application, which mandate truthful and complete disclosure of all information requested by the sheriff's office. It upholds the ethical obligation to be transparent with law enforcement and demonstrates an understanding of the serious nature of firearm ownership. An incorrect approach involves withholding or misrepresenting information about past arrests or convictions, even if the applicant believes the charges were minor or dismissed. This directly violates the statutory requirement for truthful disclosure on the application and can be grounds for denial or revocation of an LTCF. Furthermore, assuming that a past legal issue is not disqualifying without consulting the relevant statutes or seeking clarification from the licensing authority is a failure to exercise due diligence and can lead to significant legal consequences. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding eligibility, rather than consulting the official Pennsylvania statutes or the issuing sheriff's office. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a disregard for the legal framework governing firearm ownership. Professionals should approach this situation by first thoroughly reviewing the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Application, UFA, and understanding the specific questions asked. They should then consult the relevant sections of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, Title 18 PA. C. S. Section 6101 et sec. To understand the definitions of prohibited persons and disqualifying offenses. If there is any ambiguity or a history of arrests or convictions, the applicant should proactively contact the sheriff's office in their county of residence to seek clarification and guidance on how to accurately complete the application and what documentation might be required. Honesty, transparency, and proactive communication with the licensing authority are paramount. Question: comparative studies suggest that applicants for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, often face challenges in accurately self-assessing their eligibility due to past legal encounters. Considering the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, which of the following approaches best ensures a compliant and successful LTCF application when an applicant has a prior arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was later dismissed? Options: A. Fully disclose the arrest and dismissal on the LTCF application, providing any available documentation of the dismissal, and be prepared to answer further questions from the sheriff's office. B. Omit any mention of the arrest on the LTCF application, assuming that a dismissed charge does not constitute a disqualifying offense. C. Contact the sheriff's office for informal advice on whether the dismissed arrest needs to be disclosed, without submitting any formal documentation. D. Rely on advice from a friend who also has a dismissed arrest and was granted an LTCF, and therefore do not disclose the arrest on the application. Question 2. The investigation demonstrates that an applicant for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, has a documented history of domestic disputes, though no formal charges were ever filed in any of these instances. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Automatically deny the LTCF application due to the presence of domestic dispute history, regardless of whether formal charges were filed or convictions occurred. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all available records related to the domestic disputes, including any police reports or witness statements, to determine if any disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law are present, and if not, proceed with the application process. Option C. Request a psychological evaluation of the applicant based solely on the reported domestic disputes, even without any indication of mental health issues beyond these incidents. Option D. Approve the LTCF application without further investigation, assuming that the absence of formal charges means the applicant is not a risk. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of all available records related to the domestic disputes, including any police reports or witness statements, to determine if any disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law are present, and if not, proceed with the application process. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where an applicant for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, has a history of domestic disputes, raising concerns about their suitability to possess a firearm. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing an individual's right to apply for an LTCF with the paramount public safety interest and the specific requirements of Pennsylvania law. A careful judgment must be made to ensure that only qualified individuals are granted the privilege of carrying a firearm. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of all available information, including the applicant's criminal history, any reported incidents of domestic violence, and relevant court records, to determine if any disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law are present. This approach is correct because Pennsylvania law, specifically the Uniform Firearms Act, 18 Pa. C. S. Section 6101, et sec., outlines specific criteria for disqualification, including certain domestic violence convictions or protective orders. A comprehensive investigation ensures adherence to these legal mandates and prioritizes public safety by preventing firearms from falling into the hands of individuals deemed a risk. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the LTCF application solely based on the mention of domestic disputes, without a full investigation into the nature and legal disposition of those disputes. This fails to acknowledge that not all reported disputes result in legal findings that would disqualify an applicant under Pennsylvania law. Another incorrect approach would be to approve the application without any further inquiry, disregarding the potential safety implications raised by the reported incidents. This neglects the duty to conduct due diligence and uphold public safety. Finally, an approach that relies on hearsay or unsubstantiated claims without seeking official records or legal determinations would also be professionally unacceptable, as it lacks the factual basis required by law. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific legal requirements for LTCF issuance in Pennsylvania. This involves meticulously examining the applicant's background against the disqualifying criteria outlined in the Uniform Firearms Act. If initial information suggests potential disqualification, the next step is to gather all relevant official documentation, such as police reports, court orders, and conviction records. The decision to approve or deny should be based on a clear determination of whether the applicant meets or fails to meet the statutory qualifications, with a strong emphasis on public safety and adherence to the letter of the law. Question 3. When completing the Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, application, an individual recalls a minor interaction with law enforcement several years ago that resulted in an arrest but was subsequently expunged from their record. Considering the application's requirement to disclose all arrests, which of the following approaches best reflects professional and legal compliance? Option A. Disclose only the arrests that resulted in a conviction. Believing minor arrests without conviction are not material. Option B. Only disclose the arrest if the applicant believes it was a significant event that might impact their application. Option C. Fully disclose the arrest and its expungement, providing all requested details about the incident. Option D. Omit the arrest from the application, assuming that an expunged record is no longer relevant or discoverable. The correct answer is C. Fully disclose the arrest and its expungement, providing all requested details about the incident. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to accurately and truthfully disclose all relevant information on a critical government application, where omissions or misrepresentations can have severe legal consequences. The Pennsylvania License to Carry Firearms, LTCF, application process is designed to ensure that only qualified individuals are granted the privilege of carrying firearms. A thorough and honest disclosure is paramount to upholding public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. The best professional approach involves a complete and truthful disclosure of all requested information, including any past interactions with law enforcement, regardless of whether the applicant believes they were minor or resulted in a conviction. This approach aligns with the fundamental principle of honesty required in all government applications and specifically addresses the intent of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, which mandates disclosure of any history that might bear on an applicant's suitability to possess a firearm. By providing all information, the applicant allows the licensing authority to conduct a comprehensive review and make an informed decision based on all relevant facts, thereby adhering to the spirit and letter of the law. An approach that involves omitting information about a past arrest, even if it did not result in a conviction or was expunged, is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a misrepresentation by omission, violating the explicit requirement to disclose all arrests and other relevant interactions with law enforcement as stipulated in the application. Such an omission undermines the licensing authority's ability to perform its due diligence and could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal information that might be material to the applicant's suitability. Furthermore, failing to disclose an expunged record can still be problematic, as the application may require disclosure of all arrests, regardless of their final disposition. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to only disclose incidents that the applicant believes are serious enough to warrant disclosure. The application form typically requires disclosure of all arrests, charges, and interactions with law enforcement, without subjective filtering by the applicant. What one applicant deems minor, the licensing authority may consider significant in assessing firearm suitability. This selective disclosure demonstrates a lack of understanding of the application's requirements and a disregard for the licensing authority's need for complete information. Finally, an approach that relies on the assumption that an expunged record will not be discoverable and therefore does not need to be disclosed is also professionally unsound. While expungement seals records from public view, certain government agencies, including those responsible for firearm licensing, may still have access to or be able to request information about expunged records as part of their background check process. The application's instructions should be followed precisely, and any ambiguity should be resolved by erring on the side of full disclosure. Professionals making decisions in similar situations should adopt a framework that prioritizes absolute transparency and adherence to the explicit instructions of the application. This involves carefully reading and understanding all questions, providing truthful and complete answers, and erring on the side of disclosure when in doubt. If an applicant is unsure about whether to disclose a particular event, they should seek clarification from the issuing authority or consult with legal counsel rather than making a unilateral decision to omit information. The goal is to ensure the application process is fair, thorough, and upholds public safety. Question 4. Consider a scenario where a customer presents a valid Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, during the purchase of a handgun. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant action for the firearms dealer to take in Pennsylvania? Option A. Accept the Pennsylvania LTCF as valid for the transaction, even if the expiration date has passed. Option B. Make a photocopy of the customer's Pennsylvania LTCF and store it in the sales record, even if the customer verbally agrees. Option C. Visually inspect the Pennsylvania LTCF to confirm it is unexpired and not suspended or revoked, without making any copies or recording any personal details from the card. Option D. Refuse to acknowledge or verify the customer's Pennsylvania LTCF and proceed with the transaction as if it were not presented. The correct answer is C. Visually inspect the Pennsylvania LTCF to confirm it is unexpired and not suspended or revoked, without making any copies or recording any personal details from the card. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania firearms dealer regarding the proper handling of a customer's license to carry firearms LTCF during a transaction. The core challenge lies in balancing the legal requirement to verify the LTCF with the customer's right to privacy and the potential for misuse of sensitive information. A dealer must navigate these competing interests with precision and adherence to Pennsylvania law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves verifying the validity of the customer's Pennsylvania LTCF by checking its expiration date and ensuring it is not suspended or revoked, without retaining any personal identifying information from the card itself. This approach directly aligns with the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, which mandates verification of a valid LTCF for certain firearm purchases, but also respects the privacy of the individual by not creating unnecessary records of their permit status. The focus is on confirming eligibility at the point of sale, not on documenting the customer's permit details for future reference, thereby minimizing privacy risks and avoiding potential violations of data protection principles. Incorrect approaches analysis. Retaining a photocopy or digital image of the customer's Pennsylvania LTCF, even with the customer's consent, is an improper approach. While consent might be given, Pennsylvania law does not authorize or require dealers to maintain copies of LTCF. This practice creates an unnecessary repository of sensitive personal information, increasing the risk of data breaches and potential misuse, and goes beyond the scope of what is legally mandated for verification. Another incorrect approach is to accept an expired Pennsylvania LTCF as valid for the transaction. The Uniform Firearms Act clearly specifies that a valid, unexpired LTCF is required for certain exemptions or streamlined purchase processes. Accepting an expired permit would be a direct violation of the law and could lead to severe penalties for the dealer, including license revocation. Finally, refusing to verify the Pennsylvania LTCF altogether, even if presented by the customer, is also an incorrect approach. The law provides for the use of a valid LTCF to expedite certain firearm purchases. A dealer has a legal obligation to verify its validity if presented, and failing to do so means the dealer cannot benefit from the provisions related to LTCF holders, potentially leading to a more cumbersome and less legally compliant transaction process. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearms Act, while simultaneously upholding customer privacy. This involves understanding the specific requirements for LTCF verification, recognizing what information is permissible to collect and what is not, and always erring on the side of caution when handling sensitive personal data. A dealer should consult the Pennsylvania State Police or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity regarding verification procedures or record-keeping requirements. Question 5. During the evaluation of a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms LTCF application, an applicant receives a denial notice. The applicant suspects the denial might be due to a clerical error in their record, but is unsure of the exact cause. What is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for the applicant to take? Option A. Contact the Pennsylvania State Police, PSP, Firearms Division to inquire about the specific reason for the denial and the process for review or correction of any erroneous information. Option B. Visit a local licensed firearms dealer to explain the situation and ask if they can assist in correcting the record or advising on the denial. Option C. Discuss the denial with a friend who previously had a similar issue with a firearm permit application and follow their advice. Option D. Submit a new LTCF application immediately, hoping that a fresh submission will bypass the previous issue. The correct answer is A. Contact the Pennsylvania State Police, PSP, Firearms Division to inquire about the specific reason for the denial and the process for review or correction of any erroneous information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania LTCF applicant by requiring them to navigate the nuances of Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearm Act, UFA, concerning the definition of prohibited persons and the process for challenging such designations. The applicant must understand their rights and the proper channels for seeking clarification or correction of information that might impact their eligibility, rather than making assumptions or taking informal actions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the applicant directly contacting the Pennsylvania State Police, PSB, Firearms Division to inquire about the specific reason for the denial and to understand the process for requesting a review or correction of any erroneous information. This approach aligns with the UFA's provisions for due process and the established administrative procedures for firearm permit applications. The PSB is the designated authority responsible for processing LTCF applications and maintaining the relevant databases. Engaging directly with them ensures that the applicant is addressing the issue through the official, regulated channels, seeking accurate information, and initiating the correct procedural steps for resolution. This demonstrates a commitment to understanding and complying with Pennsylvania's firearm laws. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the applicant assuming the denial is due to a minor, easily resolvable issue and attempting to correct it by contacting a local gun shop. This is professionally unacceptable because gun shops are not the official arbiters of firearm eligibility or the custodians of the databases used for LTCF background checks. They lack the authority and access to rectify errors in the PSB's records or to provide official guidance on the UFA's disqualification criteria. Another incorrect approach is for the applicant to ignore the denial and reapply immediately without understanding the reason for the initial rejection. This is professionally unsound, as it fails to address the underlying issue that led to the denial, making a subsequent denial highly probable. It also demonstrates a lack of diligence in understanding and complying with the UFA's requirements and the application process. A further incorrect approach is for the applicant to seek advice from an acquaintance who has had a similar experience. While well-intentioned, this is professionally inadequate because firearm eligibility is determined by specific legal criteria and individual circumstances, not by anecdotal evidence. Relying on informal advice can lead to misinformation and misguided actions, potentially further jeopardizing the applicant's ability to obtain an LTCF. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should always prioritize direct engagement with the governing regulatory body. This involves understanding the specific laws and regulations applicable to the situation. In this case, the Pennsylvania UFA, identifying the responsible agency, the PSB Firearms Division, and following the prescribed administrative procedures for addressing concerns or seeking clarification. A systematic approach, focusing on official channels and accurate information, is crucial for navigating complex regulatory requirements and ensuring compliance. Question 6. Research into Pennsylvania's license to carry firearms, LTCF, application process reveals that an applicant has a past conviction for a misdemeanor offense that occurred several years ago. The applicant believes this offense is not a disqualifying factor under the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, PUFA, and has not been expunged. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance and a favorable outcome for the applicant? Option A. Rely on advice from online firearms enthusiast forums to determine if the conviction needs to be disclosed on the LTCF application. Option B. Consult with a Pennsylvania attorney specializing in firearms law to understand the implications of the past conviction under the PUFA and to determine the appropriate disclosure strategy for the LTCF application. Option C. Assume the misdemeanor conviction is not disqualifying and proceed with the LTCF application without disclosing the conviction based on personal belief. Option D. Attempt to have the misdemeanor conviction expunged immediately before submitting the LTCF application without consulting legal counsel. The correct answer is B. Consult with a Pennsylvania attorney specializing in firearms law to understand the implications of the past conviction under the PUFA and to determine the appropriate disclosure strategy for the LTCF application. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuances of Pennsylvania's firearms laws concerning the definition of prohibited persons and the proper procedure for addressing potential disqualifications. A careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, PUFA, and to avoid making false statements on a critical application. The correct approach involves proactively and truthfully disclosing any past legal entanglements that might be construed as disqualifying under Pennsylvania law, even if the applicant believes they are not a disqualifying offense. This approach prioritizes transparency and allows the licensing authority to make an informed decision based on all relevant facts. Specifically, the applicant should consult with legal counsel to understand how their past conviction might be interpreted under the PUFA, particularly regarding offenses that could be considered crimes of violence or offenses that carry a maximum penalty of more than 1 year imprisonment. If legal counsel advises that the conviction is not a disqualifier, the applicant should still consider disclosing it to avoid any potential misinterpretation or accusation of providing false information, and to demonstrate good faith. If legal counsel advises it is a disqualifier, the applicant must not apply for an LTCF until the disqualification is legally resolved. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation of honesty in all dealings with licensing authorities and the legal requirement to provide truthful information on the LTCF application. An incorrect approach involves assuming that a past conviction, even if minor or expunged, does not need to be disclosed because the applicant believes it is not a disqualifying offense. This is a failure to comply with the spirit and letter of the law, which requires full disclosure of any information that could be relevant to the licensing authority's determination. The PUFA mandates that applicants truthfully answer all questions on the application. Failing to disclose a past conviction, even if the applicant believes it is not disqualifying, could be interpreted as providing false information, leading to denial of the LTCF and potential criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on online forums or anecdotal advice from friends regarding the interpretation of firearms laws and the disclosure requirements for past convictions. While informal advice might seem helpful, it lacks the legal authority and accuracy of guidance from a qualified attorney. Relying on such information can lead to misinterpretations of complex legal statutes, resulting in non-compliance and potential negative consequences. The PUFA requires a thorough understanding of its provisions, which is best obtained through professional legal counsel. Finally, an incorrect approach is to attempt to conceal or omit information about the past conviction from the application, hoping it will not be discovered. This is a direct violation of the statutory requirement for truthful disclosure and demonstrates a lack of integrity. The licensing authority has mechanisms to investigate applicants, and any discovered omission or falsehood will almost certainly result in the denial of the LTCF and potential legal repercussions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to honesty, a thorough understanding of applicable laws, and the willingness to seek expert advice when navigating complex legal requirements. When in doubt about any aspect of the application process or the interpretation of laws, consulting with a qualified attorney specializing in firearms law is the most prudent and responsible course of action. Question 7. System analysis indicates a Pennsylvania resident is applying for a license to carry firearms, LTCF, and has a history of an involuntary mental health commitment that occurred several years ago. The applicant believes the commitment was minor and has since been resolved, but they are unsure if this information must be disclosed on the LTCF application, as they do not want to jeopardize their application. What is the most appropriate course of action for this applicant? Option A. Include a brief, informal note on the application explaining why the involuntary commitment was minor and should not be a disqualifying factor, without providing official documentation. Option B. Omit any mention of the involuntary mental health commitment from the LTCF application, assuming that since it was in the past and resolved, it is no longer relevant to their current eligibility. Option C. Fully and truthfully disclose the involuntary mental health commitment on the LTCF application, providing any requested supporting documentation, and allow the Pennsylvania State Police to make a determination based on the full facts. Option D. Seek advice from a friend who is a gun enthusiast and has obtained an LTCF previously, to understand how to best present their situation without causing issues. The correct answer is C. Fully and truthfully disclose the involuntary mental health commitment on the LTCF application, providing any requested supporting documentation, and allow the Pennsylvania State Police to make a determination based on the full facts. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual seeking a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, to navigate a situation where their personal beliefs might conflict with the strict legal requirements for obtaining such a license. The core of the challenge lies in the applicant's obligation to provide truthful and complete information on the application, even if that information might lead to a denial based on their personal circumstances. The Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, 61 PA, C.S. Section 6101 et seq. mandates specific criteria for eligibility, and any attempt to circumvent these requirements through omission or misrepresentation carries significant legal and ethical consequences. The best professional approach involves a direct and honest engagement with the application process, acknowledging any potential disqualifying factors upfront. This means accurately disclosing all relevant information, including any history of mental health treatment or involuntary commitment, as required by Pennsylvania law. The law is clear that individuals who have been involuntarily committed to a mental institution are prohibited from possessing firearms. By proactively addressing this, the applicant allows the licensing authority to make a determination based on the full facts, adhering to the spirit and letter of the law. This approach upholds the ethical duty of honesty in all dealings with government agencies and demonstrates respect for the legal framework governing firearm ownership. An incorrect approach would be to omit any mention of the involuntary commitment. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of the application's requirement for truthful and complete information. Ethically, it constitutes a misrepresentation, and legally, it can lead to the denial of the LTCF, a potential criminal charge for making a false statement on a firearms application, and a permanent bar from obtaining a firearm license in Pennsylvania. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to explain away the involuntary commitment without providing the required documentation or context. While the applicant might believe their situation was minor or resolved, the licensing authority must have accurate and verifiable information to assess eligibility according to Pennsylvania statutes. Circumventing the formal disclosure process undermines the integrity of the licensing system. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to seek advice from an unlicensed individual or to rely on informal opinions about firearm laws. Pennsylvania's LTCF requirements are specific and legally binding. Relying on hearsay or unqualified advice can lead to serious legal repercussions and a misunderstanding of the applicant's true eligibility status. Professionals in this situation should always prioritize transparency and adherence to the law. The decision-making process should involve thoroughly reviewing the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act and the specific application requirements. If there are any doubts about eligibility or the interpretation of the law, seeking guidance from a qualified legal professional specializing in firearms law in Pennsylvania is the most prudent course of action. This ensures that all information provided is accurate and that the applicant understands their rights and obligations under the law. Question 8. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, has been involved in multiple documented altercations at their workplace and in public spaces over the past 5 years. While these incidents did not result in criminal charges or convictions, they involved verbal aggression, threats, and one instance of minor physical contact that was settled civilly. The sheriff's office is reviewing the application, which approach best upholds the principles of public safety and due process under Pennsylvania law. Option A. Deny the license to carry firearms, LTCF, immediately based on the reported incidents, as any documented altercations, regardless of conviction status, suggest a lack of good repute. Option B. Issue the license to carry firearms, LTCF, without further inquiry, as the applicant has no criminal convictions that would automatically disqualify them under the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act. Option C. Inform the applicant that the reported incidents are a minor administrative concern and proceed with issuing the license to carry firearms, LTCF, if no criminal charges are filed, focusing on the efficiency of the licensing process. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and context of these incidents, gathering all available documentation and witness accounts to assess if they demonstrate a pattern of behavior that indicates the applicant is not of good repute or poses a danger to themselves or others, as per the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and context of these incidents, gathering all available documentation and witness accounts to assess if they demonstrate a pattern of behavior that indicates the applicant is not of good repute or poses a danger to themselves or others, as per the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act. Explanation. The control framework reveals a situation where an applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a criminal conviction, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability for a license to carry firearms, LTCF, in Pennsylvania. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to apply with the public safety mandate inherent in firearm licensing. Decision-maker must interpret the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, PUFA, and relevant case law concerning prohibited persons, and the assessment of character and reputation, even in the absence of a formal disqualifying event. Careful judgment is required to avoid both unwarranted denial and the potential endangerment of the public. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented investigation into the applicant's past conduct, focusing on whether the reported incidents demonstrate a pattern of behavior that suggests a propensity for violence or an inability to exercise responsible firearm ownership, as contemplated by PUFA. This approach requires gathering all available information, including witness statements and any official reports, and then applying the legal standards for determining if the applicant poses a risk. The justification for this approach lies in the statutory requirement for the sheriff's office to determine if the applicant is of good repute and not a danger to themselves or others, which necessitates looking beyond mere convictions. This aligns with the ethical duty to uphold public safety while respecting individual rights, ensuring that the licensing process is fair and based on a comprehensive understanding of the applicant's suitability. An approach that dismisses the reported incidents solely because they did not lead to arrest or conviction is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge that PUFA assessment of suitability is broader than just criminal convictions. It ignores the possibility that an individual might exhibit behaviors that, while not criminalized, indicate a significant risk. This approach risks issuing an LTCF to someone who may pose a danger, violating the core public safety purpose of the licensing system. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to deny the license based solely on the allegations without a proper investigation or due process for the applicant. This would be arbitrary and capricious, potentially violating the applicant's rights. The law requires a reasoned decision based on evidence, not mere suspicion or unsubstantiated claims. Finally, an approach that focuses on the applicant's perceived inconvenience or the administrative burden of a thorough investigation is also unacceptable. The gravity of issuing a firearm license demands that public safety be the paramount concern, overriding any desire for administrative expediency. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific statutory requirements of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act regarding eligibility and disqualification. 2. Conducting a comprehensive and objective investigation into any information that raises concerns about an applicant's suitability, including past incidents, even if not resulting in criminal charges. 3. Documenting all findings meticulously. 4. Applying the legal standards to the gathered evidence to make a reasoned determination. 5. Providing the applicant with notice and an opportunity to respond to any adverse information. 6. Ensuring that the final decision is based on a holistic assessment of the applicant's character, reputation, and potential risk to public safety. Question 9. Governance review demonstrates that a licensed firearms dealer in Pennsylvania is approached by a customer who wishes to purchase a handgun. The customer presents a valid Pennsylvania driver's license. However, the dealer recalls that this individual was previously denied a license to carry firearms, LTCF, due to a misdemeanor conviction. The customer claims the previous denial was an error and insists on completing the purchase. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the dealer? Option A. Refuse the sale without further investigation, citing the previous denial as sufficient grounds. Option B. Proceed with the sale as the customer has a valid driver's license and claims the previous denial was an error. Option C. Sell the handgun but advise the customer to be discreet and avoid any legal entanglements. Option D. Immediately halt the sale and contact the Pennsylvania State Police, or ATF, to verify the customer's current eligibility to purchase a firearm. The correct answer is D. Immediately halt the sale and contact the Pennsylvania State Police, or ATF, to verify the customer's current eligibility to purchase a firearm. Explanation: Governance review demonstrates that a licensed firearms dealer in Pennsylvania is facing a situation where a customer, who has previously been denied a license to carry firearms, LTCF, due to a minor misdemeanor conviction, is attempting to purchase a handgun. The customer presents a valid Pennsylvania driver's license and claims the previous denial was an error. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the dealer to balance their legal obligations to prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring firearms against the potential for customer dissatisfaction and accusations of discrimination. The dealer must exercise extreme caution and adhere strictly to Pennsylvania law regarding firearm sales. The correct approach involves immediately ceasing the transaction and contacting the Pennsylvania State Police or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF, to verify the customer's eligibility. This is mandated by the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, which prohibits the sale of firearms to individuals who are prohibited from possessing them. The previous denial of an LTCF, even if the customer disputes it, serves as a significant red flag. The dealer has a legal and ethical duty to ensure they are not facilitating an illegal transfer of a firearm. Verifying the customer's current eligibility through official channels is the only responsible course of action. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the sale based solely on the customer's assertion that the previous denial was an error and that they possess a valid driver's license. This ignores the critical information of the prior LTCF denial, which indicates a potential prohibition. Ethically, this demonstrates a disregard for public safety and a failure to uphold the dealer's responsibilities. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the sale outright without any attempt to verify the customer's current status or the reasons for the previous denial. While caution is necessary, complete refusal without investigation could be considered discriminatory if the customer is, in fact, eligible. However, the primary failure here is not attempting to confirm eligibility. A third incorrect approach would be to sell the firearm, but advise the customer to be careful or avoid trouble. This is a gross abdication of responsibility, as it implies knowledge of a potential prohibition and attempts to mitigate liability rather than prevent an illegal sale. This is both legally and ethically reprehensible. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Recognizing red flags, like a prior denial of an LTCF. 2. Consulting relevant statutes and regulations, Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act. 3. Seeking clarification from appropriate authorities when in doubt. 4. Documenting all interactions and decisions meticulously. Question 10. Which approach would be most professionally responsible for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, holder who is legally carrying a handgun for personal protection in a public shopping mall? Option A. Carry the firearm in a bag that is easily accessible, allowing for quick retrieval if needed, even if it means it's partially visible. Option B. Carry the firearm openly in a visible holster, as permitted by law in some public areas, to deter potential threats. Option C. Carry the firearm concealed, ensuring it is not visible to others, and avoid any actions that might draw attention to its presence. Option D. Inform acquaintances encountered in the mall that you are carrying a firearm for personal protection. The correct answer is C. Carry the firearm concealed, ensuring it is not visible to others, and avoid any actions that might draw attention to its presence. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the legal right to carry a firearm in Pennsylvania with the ethical responsibility to act with discretion and avoid creating unnecessary alarm or potential for misunderstanding. The individual's intent to carry a firearm for personal protection is legally permissible under a valid license to carry firearms, LTCF, in Pennsylvania, but the manner in which this right is exercised can have significant social and ethical implications. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the exercise of a legal right does not infringe upon the peace and safety of others or lead to a misinterpretation of intent. The best professional approach involves exercising discretion and awareness of one's surroundings. This means carrying the firearm concealed, as permitted by Pennsylvania law for LTCF holders, and avoiding any actions that might draw undue attention to the fact that one is armed. Concealment is not merely a legal requirement for carrying a handgun in public in Pennsylvania unless specifically exempted. It is also an ethical consideration that minimizes the potential for causing alarm, provoking a response from others who may not be aware of the individual's legal right to carry. This approach respects the comfort and safety of the public while upholding the individual's right to self-defense. An incorrect approach would be to openly display the firearm. While Pennsylvania law does not explicitly prohibit open carry for LTCF holders in all circumstances, doing so without a specific, justifiable reason, such as in a hunting scenario where it might be expected or for a specific law enforcement interaction, can be perceived as aggressive or threatening. This can lead to unnecessary fear and anxiety among the public, potentially prompting calls to law enforcement and creating a situation that could escalate unnecessarily. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of consideration for the community's sense of security. Another incorrect approach would be to carry the firearm in a manner that is easily visible and accessible, even if not fully displayed. This could involve carrying it in a holster that is not adequately concealed or in a bag that is frequently opened. Such actions, while perhaps not overtly aggressive, still risk drawing attention and can lead to similar negative consequences as open carry, including public alarm and potential law enforcement intervention. It suggests a disregard for the principle of discretion that underpins responsible firearm ownership. A further incorrect approach would be to discuss or boast about carrying the firearm with others in public. This behavior, even if the firearm is legally carried and concealed, can create an uncomfortable or intimidating atmosphere for those around. It shifts the focus from personal safety to a display of preparedness that can be unsettling to individuals who are not accustomed to or comfortable with firearms. Ethically, it is inconsiderate and can be perceived as attention-seeking rather than a genuine exercise of a right for personal protection. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of Pennsylvania's LTCF laws, including both the rights and responsibilities associated with carrying a firearm. It requires an ethical assessment of how the exercise of these rights will impact others and the broader community. Professionals should prioritize discretion, concealment, and a general awareness of their surroundings to ensure that their legal right to carry does not inadvertently create a situation that compromises public safety or peace. The guiding principle should be to exercise one's rights responsibly and with consideration for others. Question 11. Investigation of a licensed firearms dealer in Pennsylvania reveals a consistent practice of accepting incomplete background check forms for handgun sales, citing customer convenience. Which of the following actions best upholds the dealer's legal and ethical obligations under Pennsylvania law? Option A. Proceed with the handgun transfer based on verbal assurances from the buyer that they are legally eligible to own a firearm, and complete the necessary paperwork after the sale. Option B. Accept incomplete background check forms with the understanding that the buyer will complete them at a later date to expedite the sale and maintain customer satisfaction. Option C. Refuse to complete any handgun transfer until all required documentation, including the PICS form, is fully and accurately completed by the buyer and the PICS check is successfully processed. Option D. Overlook minor discrepancies in the buyer's documentation, assuming the buyer is likely to pass the background check to avoid delaying the sale. Correct answer is C. Refuse to complete any handgun transfer until all required documentation, including the PICS form, is fully and accurately completed by the buyer, and the PICS check is successfully processed. Explanation. Investigation of a licensed firearms dealer in Pennsylvania reveals a pattern of lax record-keeping regarding the transfer of certain handguns. Specifically, the dealer has been known to accept incomplete background check forms from buyers, often citing customer convenience and a desire to expedite sales. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the dealer's business interests, speedy sales, customer satisfaction, against their legal obligations and ethical responsibilities to ensure public safety through proper firearms transfer procedures. The dealer must navigate the tension between commercial pressures and the strict mandates of Pennsylvania law. The best professional approach involves prioritizing strict adherence to all legal requirements for firearms transfers, even if it causes minor delays or inconvenience to customers. This means meticulously verifying the completeness and accuracy of all required documentation, including the buyer's identification and the completion of the Pennsylvania Instant Check System, PICS, form, before any transfer of a handgun can occur. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act 18 Pa. C. S. Section 6101, et sec., which mandates thorough background checks and accurate record-keeping for all firearm transfers to prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring weapons. Ethically, it upholds the dealer's duty to act responsibly and contribute to community safety. An incorrect approach involves accepting incomplete background check forms with the intention of completing them later or relying on verbal assurances from buyers. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it bypasses the legally mandated verification process at the point of transfer. Pennsylvania law requires that the PICS check be completed and approved before the firearm is transferred. Failing to do so creates a significant risk that a prohibited person could acquire a firearm, directly violating the intent and letter of the law. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize customer convenience and expedite sales by overlooking minor discrepancies in documentation, assuming the buyer is likely to pass the background check. This is a dangerous ethical and legal lapse. The law does not permit discretion in verifying the completeness of required forms. It is a mandatory step. This approach undermines the integrity of the background check system and exposes the dealer to severe legal penalties, including license revocation and criminal charges. A professional decision-making process in such situation should involve a clear understanding of all applicable Pennsylvania laws and regulations pertaining to firearms sales. This includes regular review of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act and any relevant Pennsylvania State Police guidance. Professionals should adopt a policy of zero tolerance for incomplete documentation, viewing it as a critical risk management issue rather than a minor inconvenience. When faced with a situation where a customer's documentation is incomplete, the professional response is to politely but firmly inform the customer of the legal requirements and offer assistance in completing the necessary forms correctly, without proceeding with the sale until all legal prerequisites are met. Question 12. Assessment of an applicant for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, involves reviewing their background against specific legal disqualifiers. If an applicant who has no felony convictions, no history of domestic violence, and no adjudicated mental defects, states they wish to carry a firearm for personal protection due to general concerns about crime in their neighborhood, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority in Pennsylvania? Option A. Delay the decision on the license to carry firearms, LTCF, and request additional personal references to further assess the applicant's character and perceived trustworthiness. Option B. Deny the license to carry firearms, LTCF, based on a personal belief that individuals who express general concerns about crime are more likely to misuse a firearm. Option C. Deny the license to carry firearms, LTCF, because the applicant's stated reason for wanting to carry a firearm is not sufficiently compelling or is based on subjective fears. Option D. Issue the license to carry firearms, LTCF, as the applicant meets all statutory requirements and does not present any disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law. The correct answer is D. Issue the license to carry firearms, LTCF, as the applicant meets all statutory requirements and does not present any disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal beliefs and potential biases with their legal obligations and the rights of others. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the decision-making process regarding a license to carry firearms, LTCF, application in Pennsylvania is based solely on established legal criteria and not on subjective, potentially discriminatory personal judgments. The Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Application, UFA, process is designed to be objective, and deviating from these standards can lead to legal repercussions and erosion of public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the criteria outlined in Pennsylvania law for the issuance of a license to carry firearms. This means evaluating the applicant's background solely against the disqualifying factors enumerated in the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, such as felony convictions, certain misdemeanor convictions, adjudicated mental defects, and other specific prohibitions. The applicant's stated reasons for seeking the license, provided they are not indicative of a disqualifying factor, are secondary to the objective legal assessment. This approach is correct because it upholds the rule of law, ensures fairness and equal treatment under the law, and prevents the arbitrary denial of a constitutionally protected right based on personal conjecture. It aligns with the ethical duty of public officials and those involved in the licensing process to act impartially and in accordance with statutory requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to deny the license based on a personal feeling that the applicant's stated reason for wanting to carry a firearm is unnecessary or risky, even if the applicant meets all legal requirements. This is ethically flawed because it introduces subjective bias into a process that must be objective. Pennsylvania law does not require an applicant to demonstrate an extraordinary need to carry a firearm. Rather, it focuses on whether the applicant is disqualified. This approach violates the principle of due process and can be seen as an arbitrary exercise of power. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license because the applicant belongs to a particular social or political group that the licensing official personally disapproves of, despite the applicant having no disqualifying criminal record or mental health history. This is a clear violation of civil rights and ethical standards. Licensing decisions must be based on individual merit and adherence to legal criteria, not on group affiliation or prejudice. Such an approach is discriminatory and illegal. A third incorrect approach is to delay the decision indefinitely or request additional, non-statutory information from the applicant in the hope that they will withdraw their application, simply because the official has a general distrust of individuals carrying firearms. This constitutes a failure to act within the prescribed legal timeframe and an attempt to circumvent the established application process. It is an unethical and potentially illegal tactic that undermines the integrity of the licensing system. Professional reasoning. Professionals involved in the LTCF application process in Pennsylvania must adopt a decision-making framework rooted in strict adherence to the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act. This framework requires a thorough review of the applicant's background against the specific disqualifying factors listed in the statute. Any personal opinions, biases, or assumptions about the applicant's character or intentions must be set aside. If an applicant meets all statutory requirements and is not found to be disqualified, the license must be issued. If disqualifying factors are present, the denial must be based on specific, documented evidence that directly relates to those statutory prohibitions. This ensures fairness, legality, and public trust in the firearm licensing system. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates an applicant for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, has voluntarily disclosed information during an unrelated interaction with a law enforcement officer that may suggest a potential risk to public safety. But this disclosure was not part of the formal LTCF application process. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Immediately dismiss the disclosed information as irrelevant since it was not part of the formal application and proceed without further action. Option B. Directly question the applicant further about the disclosed information to gather more details, even though it is outside the scope of the LTCF application interview. Option C. Document the disclosure in the applicant's file and consult with supervisory personnel or legal counsel regarding its relevance and proper handling under Pennsylvania law. Option D. Share the disclosed information with other law enforcement agencies to assess any potential broader security concerns without consulting supervisors. The correct answer is C. Document the disclosure in the applicant's file and consult with supervisory personnel or legal counsel regarding its relevance and proper handling under Pennsylvania law. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations surrounding the handling of sensitive personal data, specifically in the context of a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, application. The applicant's disclosure, while potentially relevant to public safety, was made in a context that suggests a desire for privacy, and the officer's duty is to uphold the integrity of the application process and the rights of the applicant. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreach and negligence. The best professional approach involves immediately documenting the disclosure in the applicant's file, and then consulting with the appropriate supervisory personnel or legal counsel within the Pennsylvania State Police or the issuing authority. This approach is correct because it acknowledges the information received, ensures it is properly recorded for potential future review if legally permissible and necessary, and crucially, defers any decision-making about the information's relevance or use to those with the authority and expertise to interpret Pennsylvania law regarding LTCF eligibility and privacy. This aligns with the ethical principle of due process and the legal framework governing firearm permits, which often requires specific, articulable reasons for denial based on established criteria, not on information obtained in a potentially informal or unsolicited manner without proper vetting. An incorrect approach would be to immediately dismiss the information without documentation, as this could be seen as a failure to investigate a potentially relevant safety concern, even if the information's admissibility is questionable. This neglects the duty to ensure public safety and could lead to future scrutiny if the applicant later poses a threat. Another incorrect approach would be to directly question the applicant about the disclosed information outside the formal application process, or to share the information with unauthorized individuals. This violates the applicant's privacy rights and potentially compromises the integrity of the application review process, as it could be perceived as harassment or an attempt to solicit information not directly related to the statutory requirements for an LTCF under Pennsylvania law. Furthermore, acting unilaterally without consulting superiors or legal counsel risks misinterpreting the law and making an improper decision regarding the applicant's eligibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established procedures, consultation with superiors or legal experts when faced with ambiguity, and a commitment to upholding both public safety and individual rights as defined by Pennsylvania statutes and regulations governing the LTCF process. This involves a systematic evaluation of the information's source, context, and potential relevance to the specific legal criteria for firearm carry permits, followed by a documented and authorized course of action. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, holder is confronted with a situation where they perceive a potential threat, but the legal justification for using deadly force is ambiguous under Pennsylvania law. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for this individual? Option A. Rely on personal judgment and immediate gut feeling to determine the level of threat and the necessity of using the firearm, believing that their personal sense of justice supersedes ambiguous legal interpretations. Option B. Assume that possessing a valid LTCF grants broad discretion in using the firearm when any perceived threat arises, without needing to meticulously analyze the specific legal justifications for deadly force in that precise moment. Option C. Focus solely on the perceived threat and the immediate feeling of danger, acting decisively to neutralize the threat without a detailed consideration of the precise legal standards for self-defense as defined by Pennsylvania law. Option D. Prioritize understanding and strictly adhering to Pennsylvania's legal statutes and case law regarding the use of deadly force, seeking de-escalation if possible, and only resorting to the use of the firearm if the legal threshold for imminent danger and necessity is unequivocally met. The correct answer is D. Prioritize understanding and strictly adhering to Pennsylvania's legal statutes and case law regarding the use of deadly force, seeking de-escalation if possible, and only resorting to the use of the firearm if the legal threshold for imminent danger and necessity is unequivocally met. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their personal beliefs and potential biases with the strict legal requirements and ethical obligations associated with carrying a firearm in Pennsylvania. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that personal feelings do not impede the lawful and responsible exercise of a license to carry firearms, LTCF. The best approach involves a commitment to understanding and adhering to Pennsylvania's laws regarding the LTCF, regardless of personal opinions or the perceived actions of others. This means recognizing that the LTCF grants a privilege, not an absolute right to use force, and that its exercise is governed by specific statutes and case law. A responsible LTCF holder must be prepared to act within these legal boundaries, prioritizing lawful conduct and de-escalation when possible, and understanding the severe legal and ethical consequences of misuse. This approach aligns with the fundamental principles of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework established by Pennsylvania law, which emphasizes lawful possession and use, and places a high burden on the licensee to understand and abide by these regulations. An approach that prioritizes personal judgment over established legal protocols is fundamentally flawed. While an individual may believe they are acting in a manner that is right, or just based on their personal moral compass, this does not supersede Pennsylvania's firearms laws. The law defines the parameters of lawful carrying and use, and deviating from these parameters, even with good intentions, can lead to criminal charges and the revocation of the LTCF. This approach fails to acknowledge the objective legal standards that govern firearm possession and use, and instead relies on subjective interpretation, which is a recipe for legal and ethical failure. Another incorrect approach involves a passive or indifferent attitude towards the legal responsibilities of carrying a firearm, believing that simply possessing a valid LTCF absolves one of the need for continuous awareness of legal obligations or the ethical implications of carrying a firearm is a dangerous misconception. Pennsylvania law requires more than just passive compliance. It demands an active understanding of when and how a firearm may be lawfully used and the consequences of its misuse. This approach neglects the ongoing duty of care and knowledge required of an LTCF holder. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the perceived threat without a thorough understanding of the legal justification for using deadly force is also unacceptable. While self-defense is a recognized legal principle, its application is strictly defined by Pennsylvania law. Acting solely on a perceived threat, without considering the legal standards for imminent danger, and the proportionality of force can lead to unlawful actions, even if the individual felt genuinely threatened. This approach bypasses the critical legal analysis required before resorting to the use of a firearm. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable Pennsylvania statutes and regulations pertaining to the license to carry firearms. This includes not only the requirements for obtaining the license, but also the laws governing its use, particularly concerning self-defense. This understanding should be continuously updated through education and awareness. When faced with a situation that might involve the use of a firearm, the professional must engage in a rapid, yet thorough, assessment of the situation against these legal standards, prioritizing de-escalation and lawful conduct above all else. Ethical considerations, such as the sanctity of life and the responsible stewardship of the privilege to carry a firearm, must guide every decision. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a Pennsylvania resident who possesses a valid license to carry firearms, LTCF, is considering attending a local community event. The resident plans to carry their firearm for personal protection. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible approach to carrying their firearm in this public setting? Option A. Carry the firearm without a valid LTCF, assuming personal protection is the sole justification. Option B. Openly carry the firearm in a visible manner to deter potential threats and make their preparedness known to others. Option C. Carry the firearm concealed in compliance with all Pennsylvania statutes and regulations governing LTCF holders and avoid any actions that could draw undue attention to the firearm. Option D. Brandish the firearm periodically to ensure potential adversaries are aware of their capability to defend themselves. Correct answer is C. Carry the firearm concealed in compliance with all Pennsylvania statutes and regulations governing LTCF holders and avoid any actions that could draw undue attention to the firearm. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the legal right to carry a firearm in Pennsylvania with the ethical responsibility to act with prudence and avoid creating unnecessary alarm or potential for misunderstanding. The individual's actions, while potentially legal, could be perceived as provocative or threatening by others, leading to a situation that could escalate unnecessarily. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the exercise of a legal right does not inadvertently compromise public safety or create a hostile environment. The best professional approach involves exercising the legal right to carry a firearm in Pennsylvania while simultaneously demonstrating a commitment to responsible and discreet conduct. This means carrying the firearm in a manner that is compliant with Pennsylvania law, such as concealed carry with a valid license to carry firearms, LTCF, and avoiding any overt displays or actions that could be interpreted as aggressive or intended to intimidate. The ethical justification lies in respecting the peace and safety of the community, even while exercising a personal right. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and minimizes the potential for negative public perception or unintended consequences. An incorrect approach would be to openly carry the firearm in a manner that draws undue attention, such as conspicuously displaying it while engaging in everyday activities in a public place. This action, while potentially legal in some circumstances in Pennsylvania, depending on specific local ordinances and the individual's LTCF status, fails to consider the ethical implications of potentially alarming others. It can create a sense of unease and may lead to unnecessary calls to law enforcement, causing a drain on public resources and potentially putting the individual in a confrontational situation. Another incorrect approach would be to brandish the firearm or make any gestures that could be construed as threatening, even if no direct threat is made. This is a clear violation of ethical conduct and could lead to criminal charges, regardless of the individual's LTCF status. Such actions directly undermine public safety and demonstrate a severe lack of judgment and responsibility. A further incorrect approach would be to carry the firearm without a valid Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, in a location where it is prohibited by law, such as a school or courthouse. This is a direct violation of Pennsylvania's firearms laws and carries significant legal penalties. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for established legal frameworks designed to ensure public safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of Pennsylvania's firearms laws, including where carrying is permitted and prohibited, and the specific requirements for carrying a firearm. Beyond legal compliance, it requires an ethical assessment of how one's actions might impact others and the broader community. Professionals should always strive to exercise their rights in a manner that is responsible, discreet, and does not create unnecessary alarm or risk. This involves prioritizing de-escalation, respecting public spaces, and avoiding any behavior that could be misinterpreted as aggressive or threatening. Question 16. The audit findings indicate that a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction for a disqualifying offense under the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, has raised concerns for the licensing official regarding their suitability to carry a firearm. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing official in this situation? Option A. Delay the application indefinitely, hoping the applicant will withdraw or provide additional information that might lead to a disqualification. Option B. Proceed with the application process, meticulously reviewing the applicant's history against the explicit disqualifying criteria outlined in the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, and approve the license if no statutory disqualifications are met. Option C. Deny the LTCF based on a subjective assessment of the applicant's character and perceived future risk, even in the absence of specific disqualifying offenses. Option D. Initiate an extensive, intrusive investigation beyond the scope of the Uniform Firearms Act to uncover potential disqualifying factors. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the application process, meticulously reviewing the applicant's history against the explicit disqualifying criteria outlined in the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, and approve the license if no statutory disqualifications are met. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in judgment regarding the handling of a sensitive situation involving a firearm owner's application for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing adherence to strict legal requirements with ethical considerations of fairness and due process, all while maintaining public safety. The auditor's concern stems from a situation where an applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a disqualifying conviction under Pennsylvania law, raises questions about their suitability to carry a firearm. The challenge lies in interpreting the spirit of the law and the intent behind the LTCF application process, which is to ensure that only responsible individuals are licensed. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective review of all available information, strictly within the confines of Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearms Act, UFA. This means meticulously examining the applicant's history against the specific disqualifying criteria outlined in the UFA, such as felony convictions, certain misdemeanor convictions, and documented instances of domestic violence or mental health adjudications that legally prohibit firearm possession. If the applicant's history does not meet any of these explicit disqualifications, the application must proceed according to standard procedure. This approach is correct because it upholds the rule of law, prevents arbitrary denial of rights, and ensures consistent application of the UFA. The ethical imperative is to apply the law as written, without personal bias or speculation about future behavior that is not legally defined as disqualifying. An incorrect approach would be to deny the LTCF based on a subjective assessment of the applicant's character or perceived future risk, even if no specific disqualifying factors are present in their record. This is ethically and legally flawed because it bypasses the established legal framework and substitutes personal judgment for statutory requirements. Such an action could lead to legal challenges and undermine public trust in the fairness of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the application indefinitely without a clear legal basis, hoping the applicant will withdraw or provide further information that might lead to a disqualification. This is also problematic as it creates an unreasonable burden on the applicant and fails to adhere to the procedural timelines implied by the licensing process. Finally, seeking to find a disqualifying factor through overly aggressive or intrusive investigation beyond the scope of the UFA's requirements would be a significant ethical and legal breach, potentially violating the applicant's privacy and due process rights. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to statutory law, objective evidence, and established procedures. This involves understanding the precise definitions of disqualifying offenses and conditions under the Pennsylvania UFA, conducting a comprehensive review of the applicant's record against these criteria, and documenting all findings and decisions meticulously. When faced with ambiguous situations, seeking guidance from legal counsel specializing in firearms law or from the Pennsylvania State Police, which oversees LTCF applications, is a prudent step. The ultimate goal is to ensure public safety while respecting the legal rights of applicants. Question 17. Strategic planning requires a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, applicant to accurately complete their application. An applicant recalls a minor, non-disqualifying infraction from several years ago that they are concerned might negatively influence the decision maker, even though it does not legally prevent them from obtaining an LTCF. What is the most ethically sound and legally compliant approach for an advisor to take? Option A. Advise the applicant to provide a complete and truthful answer on the application, disclosing the minor infraction and any relevant details, while explaining that honesty is paramount and that misrepresentation can lead to severe consequences. Option B. Suggest the applicant consult with an attorney to explore strategies for legally avoiding the disclosure of this past incident on the application. Option C. Instruct the applicant to state on the application that they have no prior incidents, assuming the infraction was minor and unlikely to be discovered. Option D. Recommend that the applicant omit the minor infraction from the application, suggesting it is insignificant enough not to warrant disclosure given it is not a disqualifying offense. The correct answer is A. Advise the applicant to provide a complete and truthful answer on the application, disclosing the minor infraction and any relevant details, while explaining that honesty is paramount and that misrepresentation can lead to severe consequences. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania LTCF applicant due to the inherent conflict between personal beliefs and the legal requirements for firearm ownership. The applicant's desire to conceal a past, minor infraction that is not disqualifying under Pennsylvania law, but which they perceive as potentially negative, creates an ethical dilemma regarding honesty and full disclosure. Careful judgment is required to navigate the legal mandate for truthful application against the applicant's personal anxieties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves advising the applicant to provide a complete and truthful answer on the Pennsylvania LTCF application, even if they believe a minor past issue might be perceived negatively. This approach is correct because Pennsylvania law, specifically the Uniform Firearms Act, mandates truthful and accurate information on all applications for an LTCF. While the applicant's past issue may not be a disqualifier, failing to disclose it, or misrepresenting the facts, constitutes a violation of the application's sworn statements. This can lead to denial of the LTCF, revocation if granted, and potential criminal charges for making false statements. Ethical practice dictates upholding the integrity of the application process and advising clients to comply fully with all legal requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the applicant to omit the minor infraction from the application or to downplay its significance without full disclosure is ethically and legally flawed. This approach directly violates the requirement for truthful and complete answers on the application, potentially leading to severe consequences for the applicant, including denial and legal penalties. It also undermines the integrity of the firearm licensing system. Suggesting the applicant consult a lawyer to find a loophole or a way to avoid disclosing the information, without emphasizing the necessity of full disclosure, is also problematic. While legal counsel can be beneficial, the primary ethical obligation is to advise adherence to the law. This approach risks implying that the goal is to circumvent disclosure rather than to ensure compliance. Recommending the applicant simply state they have no prior incidents, assuming the infraction was minor enough not to be a disqualifier, is a direct misrepresentation. The application requires truthful disclosure of all relevant information, not a subjective assessment of what might or might not be a disqualifier. This approach constitutes making a false statement on a government application. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must prioritize adherence to Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearms Act and the principles of ethical conduct. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the Pennsylvania LTCF application, including what constitutes a disqualifying offense. 2. Assessing the applicant's situation against these legal requirements. 3. Clearly advising the applicant on the necessity of complete and truthful disclosure, regardless of their personal perception of the information's impact. 4. Explaining the potential consequences of noncompliance. The goal is to ensure the applicant understands their legal obligations and the importance of honesty in the application process. Question 18. Compliance review shows an applicant for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, appears visibly nervous and states their reason for wanting the license is a general feeling that things aren't safe anymore. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough interview to understand the specific circumstances contributing to the applicant's feeling of unsafety and assess if these circumstances meet the legal definition of proper need for self-defense under Pennsylvania law, requesting any supporting documentation if applicable. Option B. Issue the LTCF immediately, as the applicant's stated concern, however vague, indicates a desire for personal protection. Option C. Deny the LTCF based on the applicant's nervousness and the lack of a specific, articulable threat. Option D. Advise the applicant that the LTCF is primarily for recreational purposes and suggest they pursue other avenues for firearm ownership. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough interview to understand the specific circumstances contributing to the applicant's feeling of unsafety and assess if these circumstances meet the legal definition of proper need for self-defense under Pennsylvania law, requesting any supporting documentation if applicable. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing an individual's right to self-defense, as protected by Pennsylvania law, with the responsibility to uphold public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. The challenge lies in discerning between a genuine, albeit perhaps poorly communicated, concern for personal safety and a potential misuse or misunderstanding of the license to carry firearms, LTCF, privileges. A hasty or overly lenient decision could inadvertently compromise public safety, while an overly strict or dismissive response could infringe upon an individual's legal rights. Careful judgment is required to assess the credibility of the concern and the appropriateness of the proposed action. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented review of the applicant's stated reasons for seeking an LTCF, coupled with an assessment of whether those reasons align with the legal standards for demonstrating a proper need for self-defense under Pennsylvania law. This approach prioritizes due diligence and adherence to the statutory requirements for issuing an LTCF. It involves gathering all necessary information, evaluating its validity, and making a decision based on established legal criteria, rather than on personal feelings or assumptions. This ensures that the licensing process is fair, consistent, and legally sound, protecting both the applicant's rights and the public's safety. An incorrect approach would be to grant the LTCF based solely on the applicant's assertion of fear, without further investigation or verification of a proper need. This fails to meet the legal threshold established by Pennsylvania law, which requires more than a generalized fear of crime. It bypasses the critical step of assessing the specific circumstances that would justify carrying a firearm for self-defense, potentially leading to the issuance of a license to someone who does not meet the legal requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the LTCF based on the applicant's perceived nervousness or vague explanation, without providing an opportunity for clarification or further inquiry. This demonstrates a lack of due process and could be seen as an arbitrary or discriminatory decision. Pennsylvania law outlines specific grounds for denial, and a generalized impression of unease is not typically sufficient grounds for outright refusal without a more substantive investigation into the applicant's stated reasons. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the applicant to obtain the LTCF for reasons unrelated to personal self-defense, such as for recreational shooting or as a general right. The Pennsylvania LTCF is specifically for the purpose of carrying a firearm for self-defense, and advising otherwise misrepresents the purpose of the license and could lead to legal complications for both the applicant and the licensing authority. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a commitment to understanding and applying the relevant statutes and regulations meticulously. It requires an objective assessment of facts, a neutral evaluation of evidence, and a decision-making process that is transparent, documented, and defensible. Professionals must be prepared to ask clarifying questions, seek additional information when necessary, and base their decisions on established legal standards rather than subjective impressions or personal biases. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows that a Pennsylvania resident who has a clean record except for a minor traffic violation 5 years ago is applying for a license to carry firearms, LTCF. This applicant has secured a personal loan from a family member to purchase a firearm. The loan agreement specifies a repayment schedule and interest rate. The applicant is unsure if this loan arrangement, given their past minor infraction, could impact their LTCF application and is seeking the most responsible way to proceed. If the total loan amount is $800 and the annual interest rate is 5%, what would be the total interest paid over a 3-year repayment period, assuming simple interest is applied? Option A, $125. Option B, $115. Option C, $110. Option D, $120. The correct answer is D, $120. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, applicant due to the inherent responsibility and potential for misuse associated with firearms. The applicant's financial situation and past minor infractions create a complex ethical and legal landscape that requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with Pennsylvania law and uphold public safety. The core challenge lies in accurately assessing the applicant's eligibility and ensuring that any financial arrangements do not circumvent the spirit or letter of the law regarding lawful acquisition of a firearm. The best approach involves a transparent and direct engagement with the Pennsylvania State Police, PSB, regarding the specific financial arrangement. This approach is correct because it prioritizes full disclosure and seeks official guidance, aligning with the ethical imperative of honesty and the legal requirement to comply with all provisions of the Uniform Firearms Act of 1995. 4 Pa C. S. Section 6101, et sec. Specifically, the PSB is responsible for reviewing LTCF applications and determining eligibility. By proactively presenting the details of the loan and the intended use of the funds, the applicant allows the PSB to make an informed decision based on established criteria, such as whether the loan constitutes a straw purchase or if the applicant is otherwise prohibited from possessing a firearm. This demonstrates a commitment to lawful firearm ownership and respects the regulatory process. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the loan and firearm purchase without consulting the PSB, assuming the arrangement is permissible. This is ethically problematic, as it bypasses the established regulatory oversight designed to prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring firearms and to ensure lawful transactions. Legally, this could be construed as an attempt to circumvent the law, potentially leading to denial of the LTCF, revocation of any issued permit, and even criminal charges if the transaction is deemed a straw purchase or if the applicant is found to be ineligible. Another incorrect approach would be to misrepresent the nature of the loan or its purpose to the PSB. This is a clear ethical and legal failure. Deception undermines the integrity of the application process and the trust placed in firearm license holders. Pennsylvania law, particularly concerning the application for an LTCF, requires truthful and accurate information. Misrepresentation can result in severe penalties, including permanent denial of firearm privileges. A third incorrect approach would be to seek advice from an unqualified individual, such as a friend or a less reputable gun dealer, rather than directly from the official regulatory body. While informal advice might seem convenient, it carries no legal weight and could lead to misinterpretations of complex firearm laws. The PSB is the definitive source for guidance on LTCF eligibility and firearm acquisition in Pennsylvania. Relying on unofficial advice risks noncompliance and potential legal repercussions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to transparency, seeking official guidance from the relevant regulatory authority, in this case, the Pennsylvania State Police, and understanding that all financial transactions related to firearm acquisition must be lawful and clearly distinguishable from prohibited activities like straw purchases. When in doubt, proactive communication with the authorities is always the most prudent and ethically sound course of action.